everybody. I'm Cheryl Hart. I'm going to be your mistress of ceremonies today, if you will. Welcome to our monthly webinar, and thank you very much for participating. We really appreciate your being here. To answer the question that usually gets asked, yes, we will be recording, and yes, you will get a link to the recording, and you'll also get the slide deck along as well, so that you will have the materials that are presented today. Without further ado, I have a couple of people who want to make announcements, so I will call on Joan Patterson, the president of Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates. Joan?
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl. Hey, just a few announcements. I think it was last weekend, time goes by quickly. Corfa and NWA sent out a 2023 Congressional Recess Action Kit. And in it provides information on, hey, during Congress's summer recess in August, mind you, it's a working recess, but it's a great time to try to get your member of Congress or their staff out to your refuge, and it provides you with information on how to go about doing that, how to go about doing district visits, and also if you're not able to do any of those items, how to send a suggested letter to your member of Congress to talk about what the refuge system needs. That is up on our website, and if I can deal with the technology, I will put that link in the chat box. And then I also wanted to do a shout out to Matthew Emer. He has recently created a wonderful infographic that we will be sending out to everybody about advocacy and once again about how to get your member of Congress out to the refuge. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Cheryl. Or
thank you, Joan.
Eden. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. And Eden, you had an announcement also.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone who participated in our virtual Hill Days last week. It was a really great success with a lot of people contacting their members of Congress during the meetings, and we just wanted to thank you so much for participating in that. But that was all from me.
Thanks, Eden. So without any further ado, I'd like to present today's webinar. We're really excited to have this one. We've been looking forward to it for a long time. The title is Creating Community Connections, Developing Effective Partnerships, and that's something that we as friends groups do on a regular basis. So we have three experts, if you will, to help us learn more about that today. Our presenters are all working for the National Wildlife Refuge Association, and they are Angie Horn. She's the Director of Urban Wildlife Refuge Program for National Wildlife Refuge Association. Liz Figueroa is the South Florida Regional Partnership Specialist, and Lucy Crespo is the Northeast Urban Community Engagement Specialist, again, all for National Wildlife Refuge Association. And I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you so much for being here, everybody, and thank you to our presenters for bringing us this program.
And thank you, Cheryl, and thank you so much to Corfa and to the organizers for having us, and to all refuge friends and advocates for all that you do. Friends are such an important connector between refuges and communities, and so we're excited to share some information that can hopefully improve and enhance the important work you're already doing, and maybe spark some ideas to think outside the refuge or wherever you happen to be. So again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope this information is useful to you. So for those who don't know, NWRA's urban program currently works in 3 regions, Southern California, South Florida, New Jersey, and New York, in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to engage communities beyond refuge boundaries. We know not everyone joining this webinar will be working in an urban area, but hopefully the content will be just as relevant to any partnerships you would like to develop. So today our aim is to share some best practices and guidelines we use as a program to initiate, maintain, and grow partnerships. Because it's such a huge topic, we're going to start off reviewing our guiding principles, which are the standards of excellence and critical elements developed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, specifically the urban program. But we feel this is a comprehensive and appropriate approach that will apply to all sorts of outreach, regardless of where you're working. And I think U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service itself is expanding the standards of excellence to apply to programs outside of refuges as well. So We're also going to focus mainly on institutional level potential partners, that is other nonprofits, local and state agencies, schools, and things like that. We'll touch a little bit about volunteers, but it won't be the focus of the webinar, just again, because it's such a huge topic. We thought that the most relevant information for you all would be to get those building those long-term institutional partnerships with all the time we have today. So you'll hear examples from all three of our regions. So one in SoCal, one in New Jersey, and one in South Florida, focusing on how our specialists there attract investment and involvement from new partners and increase interest from legacy partners, which are our longstanding community partners. For more context and those not familiar with our urban specialists, these positions are funded in partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, specifically to provide capacity to address these issues and build partnerships. They are conservation professionals from the communities where they work, and they focus mainly on building and maintaining partnerships within these communities and filling expertise gaps that may exist with refuge staff or Friends groups. So they're a value add to both the Friends side and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service side. Aside from the partnership focus, our specialists do everything from assist biologists in the field to visiting congressional offices to raising funds from multiple sources. They even get licensed as instructors in kayaking, archery, and other recreational activities. And if you're interested in learning more about that program, you can get in touch with us anytime or visit our website for more details. And if you'd like to explore having a specialist of your very own, you can talk to your friendly neighborhood refuge or project leader or region. With that context, let's dive in, and you can put your questions in the comments section, and the ones we don't address directly in the chat, we'll try to save for the end of the presentation. So Eden, next slide, please. Okay, so you're probably going to get sick of seeing these, but doesn't matter. We want everybody to know them and internalize them and just have this in mind constantly when they're doing any kind of partnership planning. This is the theoretical basis of everything that we do. Anytime we approach a partnership, we are thinking of all of these elements. And if our partnerships don't meet these elements, then we know we have to improve. So they're pretty self-explanatory, I think, knowing and relating to the community, not just the community you live within, but communities, maybe other groups of people that you're not acquainted with. Embed yourself in other neighborhoods and other places, sort of other sectors. Connect people with nature should always be a goal for any partnership that you're doing, whether you're connecting people with nature on or off refuge. Building partnerships, obviously, that's what we do. Being a community asset, which is just making sure that you're being that long-term partner, that people know your name, they know where you're from, what you're doing, and how you might be able to benefit the community. Position yourself as a resource, basically. Ensuring long-term resources is making sure that any partnership that you're planning, that you have built in a maintenance and capacity and financial support model. We're going to talk a little bit about how we do that. But that's a huge part of any successful partnership, is making sure that that partnership can last over the long term. Providing equitable access, making sure you're considering all possible angles for who's participating in your program, who can participate, and looking at barriers. Ensuring visitors feel safe and welcome is a huge part of that, and you'll hear a little bit more in detail from Lucy in particular about how she does that with her communities. And then modeling sustainability. So again, memorize these, internalize them, and have these be your guideposts when you are developing any partnership with community. Next slide, please. So these are the critical elements, and these are sort of how we reach those standards of excellence. These are the 4 things that we think about when we're looking at partnerships. Are we being community focused, which is, are we prioritizing community needs first and their long-term goals, and making sure our long-term goals are relevant to that as well. Being intentional, making sure that you have all the information you need, you're well informed, and that you're collecting measurable data to really see that you're effectively using all this data. Inclusive, implementing solutions that involve the community and solving their conservation challenges, not just the refuges. And collaborative, which is just making sure that when you're dealing with partners that you are communicating and you know, really trying to invest in those long-term transformational relationships with the goal of increasing the collective impact of conservation efforts, not just the refuges or one or two missions, but making sure that it's very collaborative and everybody's goals are being met. Next slide, please. So knowing all the guiding principles in the abstract, how the heck do you get started or even know how to start, especially in a large urban area? When I moved to LA years ago to be the partnership specialist in Southern California, I mean, Los Angeles County has 9 million people in it. It's a huge county with a lot of stakeholders. And I began just by gathering all possible information about the current partnership landscape. The first question I usually ask is, who are we not working with? So I do a scan of current partners and developed a list of potential institutions with a shared interest in conservation and ones that are anchored in the community. Starting with state park agencies all the way down to neighborhood trusts and garden clubs. Even if they don't have landscape or park in their name, I looked into it if it's any kind of community connector. Then I ask why we're not working with them or haven't approached them, and identify those barriers and challenges, which can usually be boiled down to capacity. I'm just one person. The sheer size of the county relative to that capacity. Politics can be really tricky, especially if you're a new person coming in. And things like that. So having the list is a really good start. Just knowing where you are, knowing where the partnership landscape is, who's around the refuge within 25 or 30 miles, and then when I connect with existing partners and stakeholders, I can better sort of make these connections, you know, as we're talking, like, oh, maybe have you reached out to this person or that person? So having a full scan, external scan of all these community assets is really beneficial, I think, when you're looking at who you want to partner with and creating a long-term partnership. Next slide, please. So again, you have to really know your goals and know what you're trying to achieve before you can make yourself a community asset and figure out how you can better serve the community and connecting them back to the refuge and conservation goals. So the important questions to ask are, what types of partnerships do you want to develop and why? If you can't answer the why question, then you have to go back to the drawing board. How does this address issues or benefit the community? And then most importantly is, what does success look like? What do you want this program to look like 10 years down the line? If it's a long-term thing, how do you want it to grow? I think having those big picture goals, not an endpoint, but goals you're trying to reach and keep reaching and keep sustaining is very important. Friends and advocates are natural ambassadors and connectors between the refuges and communities. So there's a tendency to focus on benefits to and for the refuge. But the question our specialists ask after gathering information is, how can we benefit the community, as opposed to how do we bring more people to refuges? Bringing people to refuges can be a goal, but it's probably more useful to ask how you can establish yourself as an asset first, and reaching that goal would be more of a byproduct of your off-refuge activities. So if you're doing stuff in the community and people get excited about going to the refuge, that's a wonderful sort of outcome of the sort of natural process of partnership. So as a hypothetical, let's say your goal is to get people more excited in general about outdoor recreation. And you've heard from locals after attending some community meetings that they'd love to see something like a free fishing program. In places where we work, we bring these projects beyond refuge borders directly to communities so we can make a long-lasting impact and have continual reasons to interact with them. Sometimes the folks that come are inspired to volunteer and go to the refuge, but the larger benefit is a lasting space of natural habitat that you've planted or an ongoing program. And impacts from those locally can be increased water and air quality, increased access to regular recreational opportunities, and programs done in partnership with a parks department or even a corporate partner like an outdoor supply store. There's plenty of local businesses that also would want to get involved, especially if they have nearby parks or environmental assets. So to use an LA example, establishing a long-term annual fishing workshop, Trout Unlimited does this on the LA River with support from Friends of San Diego Refuges. To give you a sense of the geography, the San Diego Refuges are in San Diego, and the Friends actually fund and help Trout Unlimited carry out programs 100 miles away from the refuge in Los Angeles, and it draws a big crowd. Trout Unlimited uses those funds and puts out all the promotional material. They bring in the community, they work with the local partners, and they literally bring these things to people's backyards. Gives us the opportunity to share information about the importance of the river. It's an opportunity for river education, the importance of restoring native habitat to benefit the community, listen to their thoughts about the river and what they might want to see happen. And the community gets to know the Friends group hundreds of miles away. They also get to know NWRA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as partners who will stick around and be recognizable community assets, because they know every year when they come to this river event that it is supported by Fish and Wildlife Service, the Refuge system, the Friends. So you can have that impact from even 100 miles away. It's all about, finding those community partners that can carry out these things and helping them get the resources to that. So you don't even have to physically be there sometimes to do these things. So I thought that was a good example that might be useful. Next slide, please. So outcomes. So how are outcomes different from goals? Outcomes or any impacts from programs that you do, whether they're intentional or unintentional, and tracking outcomes year over year, month over month, whatever kind of timeline you want to use, is a very important tool in evaluating the relative success of your programs and the impacts they're having. You can track a few key metrics to guide the partnership direction and see if changes need to be made. By regularly checking in, using surveys, attendee feedback is very important, which I know a lot of you already do, head counts at events and things like that. But really, sitting down and evaluating all these metrics with your partner to determine how you go forward is, I think, a really good way to keep things going and figuring out what you actually need. And to address any challenges. So after the first program or project year, it's just good practice to identify what went wrong, what went right, what was surprising, what was expected, what was unexpected, what resources you might need to improve or expand the program, et cetera. We're constantly tracking these metrics, and we want to help also the refuges be able to track those off-refuge engagements, which will help their data calls as well. And this is something that the Friends can be really helpful with, I think, tracking these metrics within the community. I like to consider every partnership as a long-term prospect that evolves and improves according to actual needs and wants. But, if you sit down and it turns out it's not working, you never want to lose a partner, but sometimes it's not working and there's no shame in ending something after collaborating and reallocating those resources. I want to reiterate that a partnership that ends is not an unsuccessful partnership. It just means you're not meeting those goals, and there's absolutely no shame in that happening. So, but it's best to be spending your resources and time on things that you think are going to go longer and farther, rather than trying to force something that's just not happening, whether that's a lack of capacity or interest on the partner side. It's just really important to be honest and build that trust, and just be able to sort of end things if you need to. So that's enough from me. I know that's a lot of information, but we're hoping that digging in a little bit to these two local approaches will help you out. So now that you have context for how we think about partnerships in the urban program, I'll turn things over first to Lucy Crespo, who works in New Jersey, New York, and then she'll hand things off to Liz. So next slide, Eden. And Lucy, I will hand things off to you.
Thank you, Angie. So I'd like to talk to everyone a little bit about just furthering what Angie mentioned about building a partnership. That comes a lot with also building trust and breaking some barriers. So some of the things that we keep in mind when building these partnerships is a series of things. So we have community planning. So asking the community what they exactly need, whether that's through surveys, whether that's through multiple meetings and site visits, and just getting a feel for the specific need, and making sure that comes from the community. Sometimes it happens where we think the community needs something, and then it doesn't really work in the long run, because that's probably something they didn't even want in the beginning. So making sure we take those initial steps to talk to the partners, if the partners would like to do a community survey to find out further information. Those are the things that we take time to really follow up and get that right information from the get-go. Communication. So how did we receive this information? Did it come from the communities, like I mentioned, partners, local government? Sometimes, we'll see these surveys and then figure out with local government which locations are probably the most interested for them, or the areas that probably need a little bit more, you know, a lot more focus on. So and then also being consistent is another thing. You know, how often are we focusing on this location? For example, in Elizabeth, we do have the Friends of the Great Swamp here. From what I saw, you might be able to relate to this. But in Elizabeth, there were 3 main locations that we focused on with the partners, and then making sure that every single year we either had programs or events or some restoration work at those focus points, because that's what the community wanted us to do. So making sure that we're consistent with the locations, consistent with the programming and the partnership at those sites. And then how do we keep it funded is probably the hardest part. It's something that we have to plan for. It's something that we have to continue evolving, because as you go through some of the projects that you've done already, you can't continue to apply for funding for those. So you have to brainstorm on what additional funding or what haven't you done already, which the partners would like to do, and making sure that that's always something in your mind, because funding is probably one of the most important when it comes to the partnerships. Identifying barriers is another one. What does the community identify as a possible barrier? So this one, for me, it's really important that the partners and the people from the community themselves identify as a barrier, because it can vary depending on your metropolitan area that you're working on. So some partners will say the language is a barrier, whether they speak Spanish or Creole or I don't know, just you know, having these different languages in their program, making sure that we specify exactly what their need is, especially when it comes to that language barrier, which we all face in our different refuges. So we make sure to consider that a lot. Transportation, some communities might have problems with transportations, others might not. That's something we always keep in mind. And then how relevant that program is to the specific partner, to the specific community. Maybe this community really likes outdoor walks, and maybe another community likes a little bit more birding events or kayaking and archery. So we really want to make sure that we're providing those opportunities when they're asked, and where they're asked is a big part. And then also always referring back to the standards of excellence have always helped us a lot, and that's very key, very much key in our work. Next, please, Eden. So I do have a couple examples of some projects that we've worked on recently with the Friends of the Great Swamp. We had the seniors from Peterstown Community Center come out to walk one of our trails at the Wildlife Observation Center. So this is actually something that they also requested, that we have a walk, and we made sure to always consider walking at their pace and making sure we translated the whole tour for a lot of the seniors. And this was a really nice one, because we did have some seniors that did speak Spanish and others that spoke Spanish and English, so they were able to also help each other out. And it was a little hot, so we, you know, sometimes you have to alter your program to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and welcome. So that was a really good one. Eden, can you go to the next slide? So this is another way, archery. I think it's probably one of our most popular ways of attracting the community, and we get invited to a lot of community events to have the hover ball at the top, or invite them to the refuge to actually use our archery setup there. We do have an archery trailer, which we're hoping to use in the future, and that's something that you know, as we have these events, and as we do the surveys and kind of review the data, we kind of alter our program a little bit based on what each community was more interested in. So at this event, we actually, all the way to the right, was last Wednesday at the Hudson Valley. I believe it was like a partnership event, but I did a head count of everyone that came to the to our station, and out of 250 youth, I believe almost all of them went on it at least twice and tried it. So that was really fun to see. It was just really exciting to see how everyone enjoyed it and asking questions about their lives and making sure that they knew this was Fish and Wildlife, and making sure that we kind of collect that feedback while we were working with them. So next slide. So these are some other examples of some ways that we worked in the community, a lot of which we did have the support of the Friends of the Great Swamp, working with Kathy and Randy on these projects. So a lot of, well, one of them is our Mother's Day event, the first picture, making sure that we've celebrated the holiday as, you know, beautiful event that it is. And then also providing that opportunity to go outdoors, to do some birding. Sadly it did rain, but we did kind of come up with whatever we could to make sure it was an accessible event indoors at least. So we did have the hover ball, we did read some stories, we did have multiple tables of other partners that they can go around and talk to. We do have other events like tree plantings, pollinator week events where we release monarch butterflies, fishing events, which we'll do with the Elizabeth Police Department this year, and then starting up those events again. After COVID, we kind of had to make sure that we were safe with the community, but now considering that things are a little bit better, we're bringing more of these old events back. Kayaking programs are also really big within the community. Usually we do those with smaller groups, which it's more manageable, especially if you don't know how many people will come to your events. Birding programs, we do the backyard bird count, we do Christmas bird count, and any other opportunities that we can to put up feeders in the community as well. Career fairs and more. There's almost always more opportunities to partner with people, whether it's something that comes up or a program or a science barge opening or multiple pollinator week events that kind of come up, and you just almost make it a routine to expand your programming that way. Next. So career development is a big one. So one of the community needs that we have faced is making sure that the community know the different career paths and opportunities that we can provide as NWRA, as Fish and Wildlife, as Friends, and making sure young people are aware of that, and then provide them internships as well if those opportunities do come up. So this is actually one of our urban partners, Groundwork Hudson Valley. We also work with Groundwork Elizabeth, which they come from the Groundwork USA network, and we bring them to the Refuge to also learn about certain tree planting events like the with Chelsea Utter, our biologist, or if we're doing riverbank restoration projects, invasive species, but then also have a really good time by making sure we bring them out to do kayaking and some fishing even on the Refuge. So making sure that we pique their interest, but then also show them that this is a career path for them, and it's not something that's too far away from their reach, right? And then if they have questions about resume building, we also do some programs on that, or if they want to meet more of our staff, we kind of tailor the program to what the group wants and needs, which we're always collecting feedback for that and how to improve our program. Next slide, Eden. So something that we always keep in mind as well at the end of our programs is making sure that we analyze the program, making sure that we try to collect that feedback, like I've mentioned before, on how to improve the programs, how to make it better for the next group, and making sure that we're always considering the activities for that day and trying to review those if we should do the same thing or kind of change them up for the next time. So just keep in mind, why do you want these programs and how relevant it is to your partners? Did your partners feel welcomed and comfortable at your event and program? Was there anything that you would have done differently based on the feedback from the partners? And then always busting assumptions is key to a successful partnership. Just keep in mind, don't assume they can't, don't assume they won't. A lot of times we think that maybe partners won't drive to the location, but then that might not be the case for everyone. There might be a lot of people who are interested. So just make sure they provide that, they're provided that opportunity and they can decide for themselves. And just making sure that we are nice and welcoming whenever we do bring them to the refuge, because that's, you know, something that can kind of affect their decision to come to the refuge or to our events for the future. So thank you. And with that, I'll pass it on to Liz Figueroa.
Unmute. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Figueroa. I am the South Florida Regional Partnership Specialist, and I am based out of the Arthur R. Marshall Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. Kind of a mouthful there. So before I begin, I want to go back to the standards of excellence. I want to highlight 4 that I really feel are relevant to my work and relevant to the specific project that I'm going to highlight. And these, as we know, are the what. Know and relate to your community, connect people with nature, build partnerships, and be a community asset. And how do you do that? Well, relevance is key. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today with this project. And I'm going to give you an example of a project that I'm doing, but these concepts you really can take for any refuge anywhere. I just thought that showing this project to you would illustrate what I'm talking about. So relevance, make sure that your work is relevant to the community that you're working with. And Lucy talked a lot about that. Second strategy is don't reinvent the wheel. Adapt the work you're already doing to make it more relevant to your community. And you do that through community feedback, et cetera, connecting with the community, all that. The last point is create tangible pathways for connections with refuges. You really want your community to connect with the refuge in a way that is tangible and that they can really see. Next slide, please, Eden. Okay, so what is Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge relevance to the community in South Florida? So we are close to Miami, we're close to West Palm, we're close to a lot of very big urban areas. And as having lived in Miami, studied in Miami, and practiced conservation in the area myself, I knew that water quality was a big issue in all communities, and that's throughout the region. That's all across the socioeconomic spectrum, from the very rich to the very poor. So what does Loxahatchee have to do with water quality? Well, Loxahatchee is the last remnant of the Northern Everglades ecosystem, which was a once very vast wetlands ecosystem. And what do wetlands do? Wetlands are essential to good water quality. So that's really how Loxahatchee is relevant to our community, right? It's a big wetland, and wetlands directly correlate to water quality. And with that, I'll take it to the next slide, please, Eden. So how do we adapt the work that we're already doing to address this issue of water quality? Well, we have a terrific program at Lox where we plant what we call pocket refuges. And pocket refuges are terrestrial native habitats that function for habitat restoration and also as a green space in urban areas. So thinking about this project, I'm going to describe, I was like, well, how can we adapt that to address a concern, the concern of water quality? Well, can we make these habitats floating? You know, like I said, Loxahatchee is a wetland. So can we replicate a wetland in miniature form? And so there is a way, and it's been done in other places in the country, and it's really cool. And so this floating pocket refuge, as we can call it, is what we call floating wetland, floating treatment island. And I'll just give you a brief definition. Floating wetland is a floating platform for plants that can be placed in any water body, regardless of depth. The purpose is to provide a stable habitat, which allows plants to extend their roots into contaminated water and to improve water quality. They use the same biological principles as a conventional wetland. but these floating platforms can be applied where it would otherwise be impossible to have wetlands or restore wetlands. So all over South Florida, wetlands have been destroyed by urbanization and development. And what we really have now in their place are these stormwater retention ponds. And that they do exactly what the name says. They retain stormwater and store it there, and they just sit there. So we have these everywhere from parks to housing developments to schools. And that brings us to how they relate to the community. Well, like I said, they're everywhere. And so really this idea was developed with feedback from the community surrounding Loxahatchee, particularly talking at first to school teachers. And that's really our first step, to implement them in schools. And many of these schools already have these retention ponds on their campuses, and they're sitting unused. So a lot of these teachers were really excited about activating these inactive spaces and using them as teaching tools and living laboratories, which they can do with these floating wetlands. And really, they can engage the kids from, from the very get-go of this project. They'll teach the curriculum about wetlands. The kids will build the floating wetlands. They'll deploy them. They'll conduct habitat surveys, water quality analysis, and this will be an ongoing project for them. This idea was not only attractive to school teachers, but also to stormwater management department, parks and rec departments, institutions of higher learning, and other nonprofits. And particularly the Loxahatchee Friend Group is very excited about the project. The Friends have donated some money to start it up, and they're going to be very involved throughout the project lifetime. So, this is an example of something that's cross-sectional, interdisciplinary, and kind of can be applied in a lot of different settings. Again, this is also just long-term by design, because it needs to be an ongoing thing in order to really provide the ecosystem services that we want it to provide. And so with that, I'll go to the next slide, please, Eden. So how are we creating a pathway to connect with refuges through this project? As we all know, wildlife refuges communicate important conservation principles. This project will have interpretive signage and scannable QR codes that will connect to educational information, especially about the refuge, Loxahatchee, and how floating wetlands represent that wider Everglades ecosystem. Through active participation by refuge staff and friends and others connected to it, the community will really see these people becoming active faces in the community, and thereby associating the refuge and with a community asset. So we'll go into the communities and really, really try to become community assets to them by just showing up. Finally, the hope is that the community will see the ecological benefits of this work in their parks and schools, and associate the refuge with the solution to an issue that they experience in everyday life. So what's the issue? Water quality. What's the solution? Wetlands, right? Then hopefully they will understand the importance of these landscapes and care about protecting them. And like I said at the beginning of my presentation, this is a very specific example, a specific regional example, but the concepts that I talked about can really be easily replicated at any refuge. Doesn't matter if you're urban, doesn't matter if you're rural, north, south, west, east, wherever. What you really want to do here is think about what your refuge does for the ecosystem, right? What is its function? What does it do? How does that relate to a community issue? And how can you package what the refuge does into a project that really benefits the community? And so with that, I will pass it over to Angie, and I think we're going to have a Q&A session. So thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. So we'll leave this Q&A slide up for a second. With any of the stuff you've heard, if you have any questions, follow-up questions, anything we don't address, we wanted to leave intentionally 15-20 minutes for Q&A so we can really address any questions you have. But again, this is all of our contact information. You can reach out to any of us. You can also visit refugeassociation.org to find out more about the urban program in particular, but also find out about, because we'll be posting progress on our projects as well on the website. So if you're interested in the floating wetlands or what Lucy's doing in New Jersey, you can kind of monitor that by following us on Facebook, Instagram, or just following along on our blog and refugeassociation.org, which I'm sure you all visit every single day and have it bookmarked. So Cheryl, do we have any questions from the panel, or do we have anything from the chat?
We have a question that just popped up, or a comment anyway, that I haven't read yet, so I'll just read it raw. To what extent might the Walk for the Wild also serve as a pathway into the refuge for the community? Are you familiar with the Walk for the Wild activity? It's part of the branding, Fish and Wildlife branding program.
Not entirely. Can you go into a little more detail about that?
Ken, do you want to come off mute? And you have experience with it and I don't. So rather than translating, would you like to come off mute and answer the question?
Aloha. The Walk for the Wild Zoom starts at about 1:15 for those who want to find more about it. But part of National Wildlife Refuge Week, they're trying to get each of the refuges involved in a walk of 5K, and you do what you might want to do to introduce the public to your refuge. I put in the chat a few things that we did at Hakalau that enabled us to, after 4 years of closure with COVID and other issues, have a soft reopening of our refuge. And we had 400 registrants, and this year we're trying to get 500. We had 24 natural history experts that lined the walk, and we had 10 natural history exhibitors to educate the public as to the resource they have in their backyard and reintroduce them to the refuge. So it's for our community. In any event, it served as a way of bringing the public back in, and we had all different ages attending. So we had a fellow who dealt with insects, and he had the children finding spiders and what have you. So it was a great opportunity for the public to reintroduce themselves. Again, if you wanted to become more involved and learn more about it, there's a Zoom that starts at hour 15 minutes that's put on by PLA on behalf of the National Wildlife Service.
Okay, great. I think having a big reopening event and putting all those resources in is a wonderful one-off, especially for a themed week. But I think the Walk for the Wild can also maybe open up some possibilities for smaller events that occur throughout the year. For instance, doing a seasonal Walk for the Wild. If you're in Hawaii, I guess you don't really have that many, but maybe in the Northeast. You can do one per season so people can see the different birds that come in and see the changes in the wildlife refuge over time. You can also bring in, instead of having, let's say, a dozen natural history people talking to people and engaging all of them at once, you can maybe pick 1 or 2 themes and maybe one time have an expert on birds, maybe the next time have an expert you can have on insects, someone on plants. I think there's an opportunity there for the Walk for the Wild to be a huge pathway to the community and maybe pave the way for smaller, more focused walks along any of the refuges. I think that's wonderful. I think taking anything that you do once a year and maybe scaling it down can be a really good way to keep the community engaged year round. And you can also find outside groups that actually specialize in organizing walking. Off the top of my head, Girl Trek is an organization that organizes Black women, girls, people of all ages, and actually takes them to a park or a national park or a refuge or something like that. And that's what they do, is they walk the wild. So I think looking at those partners and bringing them in for a Walk for the Wild could also be a pathway into individual communities that you may not have had interaction with. And yeah, so mahalo for the question. And I hope that is a little bit helpful.
Thanks, Ken and Angie. I don't see any more. Yes, I do. Sorry. For friend-sponsored events at our refuge, number one, do you have people sign releases? And number two, do you have event-specific insurance, for instance, kayaking trips?
It's highly dependent. So for off refuge events, it's a different thing. And I think Lucy just had that experience where NWRA actually had insured the public events in the county park. So it's really dependent. Sometimes NWRA can step in and do that. If it's an event that we're involved with. We don't have people sign releases unless it's an insurance requirement. So I guess for kayaking, yes, we would have them sign releases, but for archery, no, it's not really necessary. So I think for anything kayaking related or maybe hunting, if there's like a gun involved, you would probably need waivers on top of your umbrella insurance policy, but normally your umbrella insurance policy, if you have one, is usually sufficient. And if you're a friends group that's smaller and may not have an umbrella policy, this is where partners can come in handy. If you get a larger institutional partner, they usually have insurance. And like I said, NWRA has also done this where we have partnership specialists. So it's really a case-by-case basis, but if you're doing it off refuge, in a county park or something like that, it's really dependent on the activity. But normally an umbrella insurance policy will cover you at least for an archery event or fishing event. For kayaking and anything involving guns, it's probably a good idea to get some waivers. One of the things I'd like to do eventually is maybe have templates of examples of waivers that are downloadable for friends. So if you do need a photo release or something like that, you can just access that whenever you need it and adapt it for your needs. But yeah, for the most part, I would, if you don't have your own umbrella insurance policy, it's an off refuge event, talk to your partners about that. Or if you're partnering with NWRA, talk to one of us. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. And we have another insurance question. We didn't know you were supposed to be insurance experts today, but that seems to be a concern. I'm trying to figure out what insurance needs would be needed for walks on the refuge, field trips, and so on. And just our experience is you deal with your insurance agent, you tell them what you're planning to do, and they tell you what kind of coverage you need to have generally. So if you already have, I'm assuming you already work with an agent for your board insurance and that kind of thing, you just contact them and say, hey, we're planning to do this kind of an activity. What kind of coverage do we need? Is it in addition? Often it's not even an additional charge. It's just they need to write the right document for you. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, it's so for something like a field trip, like we recently had in Los Angeles, we partnered with Nature Nexus Institute and did a field trip with Young Ambassadors program. And that was already covered. So all of the students were already covered under NNI's insurance policy for that field trip. So they were completely covered. I think the only time, like, we had people sign releases for an LA River kayaking trip, which was very small. And that was just, it was all adults who signed the releases, saying that we're not liable for any injury or anything like that. Those you kind of have to run by legal counsel, which is why I think one of the things we want to do is provide those examples of things that have been vetted and can be adapted. I think that would be good for friends. But generally for low impact trips like walks, unless you're going into active bear country, I don't know that you would really need it. I think if you're just walking and looking at birds, you're okay. But anything where there's maybe a higher risk of danger from either animal or weapon use, I think you would probably want to have the added protection of a release waiver on top of your insurance policy. But again, it's highly dependent. We have to take it on a case-by-case basis every time. So that's why we just have all these resources we can draw from. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And I don't know, Lucy, do you want to talk a little bit about how that worked with the county?
Yeah, I was going to mention that. So for the walks, like you said, we never had any issues on needing the insurance for walks, but there were some concerns if we had an event in Elizabeth, for example, and we did have to provide insurance for those. And their biggest concern was having bouncy houses there. For some reason, they either don't cover some of the damages or you have to add additional insurance for those things. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to have a bouncy house at the refuge or at one of your programs. That's just something you might run into, asking the right questions before anything, bad can happen. But typically walks no. Kayaking is the only insurance I've had an issue with, whether it's if a partner had it. The refuge, as you know, is really tough to get their insurance policies from the region and trying to get that. So we typically try to do it in-house if we can, if not, if one of the partners have it. But kayaking is just one of those complications that we've had on who has it and where can they really kayak, if it's in the region or if they actually get coverage for other locations, is something that we faced. But hopefully that helps. Yeah, it just depends on what you're working on and just making sure you go through your insurance, asking the right questions so you're covered if anything happens.
Thanks, Lucy. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to take advantage of a few minutes of time to ask you a question.
Oh, I saw one pop up.
Do you have another one?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
okay.
one in there.
Go ahead.
So this is from Sue Wilder, and then Cheryl, will go to yours after that. Sorry, I just saw it pop up. So
That's
Sue
okay. Go
says, do you find that by extending partnerships outside the refuge, does that dilute the mission of Refuge Friends groups, and does that need to be addressed? And that's a fantastic question. I want to say this is all a value add for Refuge Friends groups, because one of the big challenges friends groups have, I think, at least in my experience, is how do you replenish the ranks, so to speak, and invite more people in to become friends. As people retire, phase out, move away, restocking the volunteer corps and the friends group is really important. And, I think getting younger people in, more diverse people into friends groups is a real, I think, need that a lot of friends have. And I think this, by working with the communities off the refuge, making yourself a community asset just invites more people into being more interested in the Friends mission. So you can actually grow your Friends ranks by doing more off refuge. People may not even know you existed before you brought an archery program, but now you've got a core of like 14 to 16-year-old kids who know the Friends group and, they're interested. They see people out there volunteering. Any connections you make with the community, I think, expands the mission of the Refuge Friends groups and expands the conservation constituency. And I think that's all a value add to the refuge. So I don't know, Lucy or Liz, if you want to expand on that, but that's my perspective on that. I don't think it dilutes the mission at all. I think it can help the Friends.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I haven't heard anything about diluting the mission. I feel like sometimes we have too much to work on and it all feels so important that we don't have enough time for it. But it's just, like Angie said, it's just building upon what you're currently doing and expanding that, reaching an arm to the communities that are surrounding you, and hoping that one day they'll come to the refuge with their families, join some of the activities that you're already working so hard to create on the refuge, and making sure that the people who live nearby know that this is happening at the refuge. And we're just a helping hand wherever we can to make that happen and be able to support the Friends and the hatcheries in whatever way we can. I know one of the conversations we've had with the Friends of the Great Swamp is the damage of how many people came to the refuge after the pandemic, whether it was school groups. I know we didn't have many school groups coming or organized groups that were coming. So that's something that we were facing, and just brainstormed on how we can help, with those issues and how we can build upon that. And we've had a really great time with some of the events and some of the future planning. So like I said, we're just here to help. We're not, haven't seen any diluting of the mission, just improving and expanding on it.
Thanks, Lucy. So another question come in. Whoops, just lost it, from Ed. Do you wear Fish and Wildlife Service uniforms when working with the public in the urban settings? I don't think they mean you specifically, but do Fish and Wildlife staff wear service uniforms?
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife Service staff do tend to wear their uniforms. We do not, and that's a whole other story. We are working on NWRA branded t-shirts for our staff to wear. But actually, and maybe Lucy can, or Liz, you can expand on this. It's actually, it's better to have non-uniformed people at first, I think, because sometimes the uniform can itself be a barrier to connecting. And we've had examples of people being afraid to engage because representatives of the federal government are there, which is, so it can be an issue. So we personally don't wear Fish and Wildlife Service uniforms. When we do have Fish and Wildlife Service people involved, they wear whatever's appropriate for the activity. Yeah, we like to have a bunch of different organizations represented that are clearly marked. And so, yeah, that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. And Lucy kind of addressed the question that I was going to ask. In the back of my mind, as we've worked on being more open and inclusive and welcoming to underserved populations at our refuge, in the back of my mind, it's always been, it'd be a wonderful day when it's just a mix of everybody comes to one of our second Saturday work days, or it comes to a special event that we have, a speaker or something. So that was what I was thinking would happen. And in many instances, it hasn't. When we've had an event or something for a specific population, a specific group of people, they attended, they participated, and everybody else kind of walked away as though they were not a part of that or not included, until we had this spring, we had a group of high school students who we worked with who put on a climate summit at the refuge. And so they had tabling and speakers and all kinds of things going on. And the amazing thing that happened was everybody who was at the refuge that day kind of became a part of that festival. It was directed at high school and middle school populations, but we had people, families came in and sat down and listened to the speakers, or they were talking to the people at the tables and that kind of thing. So that was what I was envisioning as the ideal outcome, was everybody's in this together, we're all enjoying the refuge and we're all enjoying nature. Is that terribly unrealistic, or how do you come to that point where it isn't, oh, today we're doing everything in Spanish language, so only people who speak Spanish want to come, or that kind of thing?
Lucy, do you want to take that one, or?
Yes, I'm sorry if my dogs are a little bit in the background. Yeah, so it's not realistic. I feel like sorry about that. I actually get that a lot, especially with the language barriers and making sure that we have the different programming in Spanish or English. And you do get a lot of people chiming in when you least expect it during our events. And for example, at Peterstown, there were times that we did arts and crafts, and we focus on just a specific group of the seniors that were really into. Oh, sorry about that. Liz, do you want to pick up on that a little bit? Sorry, they're not cooperating.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a really great dream, and I think it can definitely happen. I would say that really trying to go into all these communities and make yourself an asset in every community, that will draw all kinds of different groups to the refuge, and they'll feel more comfortable, seeing refuge staff that they know, that'll make them feel more comfortable in these big events with everybody there. So I think it's also just a question of reaching out to diverse communities and making sure that you're working with anyone and everyone, so that they feel welcome at these events. So
yeah, and I think on the inclusivity piece, when you're promoting it, just don't say, hey, unless it's like Latino Conservation Week and you really are focusing on that, I would say, make sure that the language is broad and general and bringing everybody in, but make sure there's a note that says, instruction will also be provided in Spanish or a different language. So make sure your communications to these groups are inclusive and that there's multiple opportunities for people. So you have some bilingual folks at the event, but I don't think it needs to be focused directly on one community. I don't think it's out of the question at all to bring them all together. I think it's very possible to have these very inclusive events. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Thanks. Okay, I found something, a plus of COVID is that most people realize that nature can give them can most people realize what nature can give them? The demographics of birders have really broadened. Nature is for everybody and everybody. We're working on that concept right now. Any suggestions or recommendations for focusing on the wellness aspect, the mental health and wellness aspect?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of concepts. So the first thing I always bring to people, and I actually, the physician in charge of the Park RX program, I wish he had called it Nature RX instead of Park, because I feel like then refugees always feel like they're excluded. But Park RX is a really good idea. And a lot of physicians and mental health care professionals have literally bought into this idea where they prescribe walks in nature for various maladies. And they've actually created an interactive map that shows like the nearest nature to you. So they don't just tell you go walk in a park somewhere, they actually give you the resources to do that. Granted, the last time I engaged with these folks was pre-COVID, but I imagine the work is still going on. And I was just about to propose that we include the Refuge maps in that tool as well when COVID kind of shut everything down. But I would agree that COVID really did make people appreciate nature more. I know the birding has gone way up. There's bird Twitter has just gone off. You know, it's people of all ages and shapes and sizes, because birding is so accessible. You can do it from your backyard window, or you can do it when you're walking around. I think the key there is expanding beyond birding maybe and getting people interested in those other things. But that's I think there's a critical capacity issue here, because so many people decided to go out to the national parks and more people came to refuges, that now we have an issue where we just don't have enough staff capacity to support all the people who want to go to these things. So I think that's also where the Friends can come in, and building the volunteer corps is upping our ability to absorb those extra visitors and providing more services to them as well, because visitation is only going to go up from here, I think. So.
Thank you. And we're going to take one last question. Kathy Woodward, you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
I wanted to make a comment both on the question of what we wear when we go, and also the including a lot of different kinds of people. I love our partnership with Elizabeth, and so happy to have Lucy aboard. One of the partners is Groundwork Elizabeth that they work with. And they, on one event, gave me a t-shirt when I was there with Groundwork Elizabeth. So often I wear that t-shirt to events and wear my volunteer badge. So I'm duly identified. And my Spanish is awful. But working with the groups, they know me a little bit. They translate, they teach me words. And it's fun going both ways, and we laugh a lot. So just two comments.
I think that's an important point, Kathy, that these things should also encourage people to interact with each other and not just nature. I feel like when we do events like fishing events, people from different neighborhoods are meeting each other for the first time and bonding over this shared experience, and a similar thing with archery. So I think that's a perfect example of why this is so important. It brings the community together to appreciate nature and to interact with each other in ways they may not have done before. So there is a question that came up, or a comment that I did want to address before we close out. I'm so sorry, I know we're going over, but I think it is very important. So Friends of Cibola, Carissa said, I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I feel it's important when spending money outside the refuge, we should always make sure that the purpose of the funding is being spent on what goes back to continue the mission. And I think one of the reasons, I think that's why tracking metrics and outcomes is so important, because the dollars we spend, like even if it's the Trout Unlimited fishing event, you know, they generated a report and showed where all that money went, the amount of equipment that was bought, the number of people engaged, gathered all the information. So I think that's a super important point. And that's another thing that metrics and outcomes, tracking those will help you, because you can show where those dollars are going, and the community, you know, the impact on the community, not just in a practical sense, but also a financial sense. So you can get a sense that you're not just spending money and it's going out into the void, but that these people are really engaging with nature and finding out about the refuges. So I wanted to address that point before we close out, but Cheryl, I will hand it back to you. And I wanted to say that again, if we didn't get to your question, or you have questions, or something comes up later today, reach us, you know, anytime, email any of us, and we will respond to the best of our ability. And also, you know, we want to encourage our NWRA to do more things that might benefit friends, sort of like just having those simple templates that you can download, and just try to smooth over some of these issues that everybody runs into. So I'm hoping that's a value add for you all. And again, I want to thank you all for your time, and thank you for your you know, for sticking around for a little bit longer than you anticipated, but I hope this was all beneficial to you. So Cheryl, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Angie and Lucy and Liz. We really appreciate the information you provided for us and the questions that you answered. Thank you very much. It was really helpful. Thanks to everybody who attended today, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everybody.